Part 86. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 851. What if I say no? At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the ice goddess said, he couldn't help but burst into laughter. He just looked back and forth at the ice goddess with a smile on his face for a while, and then he said in a deep voice. If you say no, I'm afraid you will have to pay a price by then. After seeing this scene, the time and space beast's face began to look a little less normal. At this time, even Bai Binjiao noticed Lin Yu's abnormality. And at this very second, the same Lin Yu actually appeared in front of everyone. Lin Yu's eyes widened with anger and his eyes were fixed on the person in front of him. I understand. The reason why you just tried every means to arouse my curiosity and ask me to see the space fragments was because you just wanted to steal my consciousness. It's a pity that I still got out of your predicament. Bai Binjiao and time and space were the two of us striking at the same time, and Bai Binjiao directly used the ice holy spell. The space-time beast directly compressed this space. At this time, this space was compressed quietly, and then the person standing there was seen, and it exploded almost at this moment. Come. But that person was not affected at all, and instead came directly behind the ice goddess. The ice goddess couldn't even tell when the person came behind her. At this time, the ice goddess's face was slightly pale. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he just let out a cry from his mouth. An angry roar. Stop. But what Lin Yu said was indeed a little late, because at this time, he saw that person directly penetrated the heart of the ice goddess. At this time, Lin Yu, after seeing this scene, his eyes were splitting, and his eyes were filled with a kind of gloomy murderous intent. At this time, his fists were clenched, and the murderous intent on his body was even more awe-inspiring. Out. Damn, he deserves to be killed. At this time, Lin Yu almost gritted his teeth and forced out these few words from the corner of his mouth. And at this moment, I saw that guy possessing the ice goddess. Little guy, although you have understood it now, so what can all this do? My goal has been achieved, and I have also started the self-destruction process here. It won't take long for this place to explode. You guys, it's probably too late to leave. When Lin Yu saw this scene, he was furious. At this time, he suddenly rushed towards that person. But at this moment, that guy actually disappeared in front of Lin Yu little by little. At this time, Lin Yu's expression was filled with a kind of gloomy murderous aura, which began to spread quietly. Come on. Damn it, I have to kill you. At this time, the space-time beast turned its head, glanced back and forth at Lin Yu and Bai Binjiao, and then said in a deep voice. This space will soon be annihilated. Now without further ado, we have to leave here as soon as possible. Otherwise, we may be crushed here forever. At this time, Lin Yu looked at the sealed space nearby, and his entire expression was filled with helplessness. Lin Yu naturally had a faint wry smile on his lips, and then he turned his head and glanced at the space-time beast. Now the space here has been completely sealed. If we want to leave, it may be impossible now. After the space-time beast heard what Lin Yu said, a meaningful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then he turned his head and looked back and forth at Lin Yu, with a more expressive expression. A bit of fun. Don't forget, although the space is blocked, time is still running here. I just need to move the timeline back a little, and then leave from there. When Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he couldn't help but ponder for a while. Finally, he stared at the space-time beast with a smile on his face, and something flashed through his eyes. A look of joy. It's true, I knew you would find a way. The space-time beast did as he was told, and then several people escaped directly outside the forest. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly remembered that one of his original clips seemed to include clips about the White Lotus sect. At this time, Lin Yu turned around and glanced at the space-time beast. I remembered that the White Lotus sect did exist during that troubled time, so your White Lotus sect most likely came from that troubled time. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on me, and then the excitement on his face became more and more obvious. When the space-time beast heard this, Lin Yu's expression couldn't help but condensed after he finished speaking, and then he gently rubbed his chin. Interesting, this matter is getting more and more interesting. Our White Lotus sect did have a predecessor before this, but the history of that predecessor is a bit too long, so even a few of us don't understand, what is the origin of our White Lotus sect. I didn't expect that you would discover it first. The space-time beast just said this softly, and then stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and there was quite a bit of amusement in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu heard the time and space beast. After saying this, he also laughed like this. Ha ha ha, I always feel that that guy should be related to your White Lotus section now that that guy has escaped, it is really a troublesome thing. At this time, the space-time beast heard Lin Yu again. After saying this, he couldn't help but ponder for a moment, and then he half closed his eyes, and a hint of helplessness flashed across his expression. In other words, the corner of his mouth also evoked a bit of a wry smile. Oh, I seem to have a bit of an impression of that guy. Bai Binjiu and Lin Yu's expressions tightened after hearing what he said. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 852. What? You have some impression of that guy? What kind of impression is it? Tell me. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the space-time beast, and then he spoke softly. And at this time, the space-time beast just wanted to speak, and then a few solemnities suddenly flashed across his face. At this time, his face sank, and then he spoke coldly. Alas, it's too late to say it now. The most urgent thing now is to escape quickly. There is a nasty guy here. The space-time beast just said helplessly at this time, and his whole expression was full of helplessness, and the corners of his mouth naturally raised a few faint bitter smiles. And at this time, he heard an extremely arrogant and cold voice. Just like that, the voice was suddenly so harsh that people couldn't help but feel like tearing the person who made such a voice to pieces. At this time, Lin Yu and the space-time beast, after hearing that voice, both of them looked indifferent. You are really a haunting guy. I am really curious. Why do I always want to get rid of you, but I can't? You are just like a piece of dog skin plaster. At this time, Lin Yu just said this in a cold voice, with a gloomy look in his eyes. The murderous aura on his body was almost completely released at this moment. At this time, Everald's figure suddenly fought in front of them. At this time, Everald looked down from above, and his eyes were fixed on the space-time beast. Anubigus, I didn't expect you to escape here. I once said that no matter where you escape to, I will find a way to catch you, but why don't you believe me? After hearing what Everald said, the space-time beast just snorted coldly, and then a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he heard him say this almost with gnashing teeth. Your good days now may not last long. There is something I have to remind you of. That guy is back. At this time, Everald heard the space-time beast say this, and a trace of fierceness flashed across his face in an instant, and then he saw Everald's eyes wide open, staring at the space-time beast, and a faint murderous aura was almost completely released at that moment. You mean that guy? How is that possible? Don't think I don't know that guy was sealed forever 3 epochs ago. After hearing what Everald said, the smile on the corner of the time and space beast's mouth became more obvious. He just stared at Everald with a smile on his face. Although he didn't say anything, Everald obviously began to realize that something was wrong with this matter. Don't tell me that you let that damn guy out. At this time, the time and space beast just stared at Everald with a smile on his face, and then he spoke leisurely and unhurriedly. What you said is indeed half true, we really let that guy out. At this time, the time and space beast spoke softly and unhurriedly, and the faint sneer on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. The space-time beast didn't know why, but after seeing his brother's face full of frustration, he found this kind of thing very interesting. The voice of Everald suddenly increased several degrees, and his eyes were full of indifference and murderous intent, and then he was nailed to the space-time beast. "Damn it, I have to kill you now, I can't rest until you die." At this time, the space-time beast, after seeing Everald's rage, had a cold smile on his lips, and then disappeared in the next second. The voice of the space-time beast filled the space. "Damn it, I now find that I like to see you angry more and more, because it's really interesting." The voice of the space-time beast began to echo in this space. A moment later, in this space-time beast, several of them suddenly showed their figures. At this time, the space-time beast was completely smiling, and at this time, he was heard to speak leisurely and unhurriedly. "I can even imagine what kind of expression that hateful guy has now. He must be very angry now." After the space-time beast said this, he couldn't help but laugh out loud, and the whole person seemed to be completely crazy. After Lin Yu saw the space-time beast like this, he just coughed lightly, and then said softly, "Hee, how can you be like this? Although this matter is indeed very funny, ha 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 ha, you didn't see the look of that hateful guy just now, his face was almost twisted by anger." When Bai Binjio saw the two of them like this, 3 black lines appeared on her forehead. At this time, Bai Binjio seemed to remember something. "It's getting late. I should go back to school. Otherwise, I'm afraid I will be in trouble." Lin Yu and the space-time beast heard it. After Bai Binjio said this, she nodded gently. "You are right. Now it is time to send you back." After hearing Lin Yu say this, Bai Binjio's face was a little more happy, and then her big watery eyes stared straight at Lin Yu, looking at Lin Yu with a smile on her face. "Are you serious? Do you really want to send me back?" Lin Yu nodded gently. "Now that the guy has been reincarnated, I'm afraid you might be in danger. I think it's best for us to stay together now. After all, the two of us can still protect you." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 853. At this time, Bai Binjio, after hearing what Lin Yu said, had a faint bitter smile on her lips, and then a bit of helplessness flashed across her face. She just stood there obediently, and was silent for a moment. "Alas, actually I don't want to go back to school, but now there are some things that I can't help but go back." After hearing what Bai Binjio said, Lin Yu's expression flashed with a bit of confusion, and then he turned his head and glanced back and forth at Bai Binjio, with a bit of complexity flashing across his expression. "What's wrong? Is there anything you must do when you return to school?" Bai Binjio nodded. "Now it's the final exam. If I don't pass the exam, I will be severely punished." After hearing what Bai Binjio said, Lin Yu's expression was filled with a kind of disbelief. His eyes stared straight at Bai Binjio, and then he said softly, "Final exam? Aren't you a direct disciple? Do you have to take the exam as well?" Bai Binjio rolled her eyes, and then she looked at Lin Yu unhappily, and then she said helplessly, "What do you think? Everyone in Atlantis needs to be assessed, not just us, but also the professors and elders." After hearing what Bai Binjio said, Lin Yu gently stroked his chin, and a bit of complexity flashed across his expression, and then he nodded. "Is that so? In that case, then okay." Bai Binjio also turned around and glanced at Lin Yu, and then she said softly, "Is it convenient for you to go back with me? If you have other things to do, then let's just forget about this for now." Lin Yu pondered for a moment at this time. There is nothing else to do now, so let's go. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Bai Binjiao's face was also a little more happy, and then she nodded. Okay, if that's the case, then we've made a deal. Lin Yu and Bai Binjiao rushed towards Atlantis together. White Lotus Sect. Everald, a bit of gloom flashed across his face. He sat on the White Lotus throne, and his face was full of a kind of coldness. At this moment, she looked gloomy and slightly cold. Damn it, why did that guy appear? Why did that guy let him show those hateful guys again? He deserves to be killed. And at this moment, a faint voice suddenly sounded. Who should be killed? After hearing that voice, Everard's expression froze. The next second, he suddenly found himself isolated from this world. His face turned pale. How is it possible? Space and time are cut off. No, this is my own space and time. A woman appeared in front of Everard slowly. Her eyes were fixed on Everard. A faint sneer appeared at the corner of her mouth. There was a playful look in her eyes and eyebrows. Hee hee, I didn't expect you to find me. What an interesting guy. At this time, the Eye Saint's eyes were fixed on Everard. At this time, Everard looked at the woman's pale face. The woman was obviously humiliating him. After all, the woman had appeared in front of him. If he couldn't find her, he would be blind. But the woman was lurking until he exposed himself, and he didn't find her at all, which was enough to show that this woman was absolutely stronger than him. When Everald thought of this, his heart fell to the bottom. At this time, he just took a deep breath and calmed down. Tell me, what do you want to do this time? Just say it. You're welcome, Everald said in a cold voice, with a gloomy look on his face, and a faint murderous aura was almost completely released at that moment. At this moment, after hearing what Everald said, the woman nailed Everald with a smile on her face, and then said in a slow and deep voice. What do I want to do? It's very simple. I just want to make you my slave. This woman is also arrogant enough. As soon as she opened her mouth, she wanted to make 1/3 of the world's rulers her slaves. Of course, Everald would not surrender, because he had his own pride, and he would never give up his dignity no matter what. At this time, Everard just snorted coldly, and then a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then others heard him say this almost with gnashing teeth. I don't know how many slaves you have, and I don't know how many people want to be your slaves, but listen to me today. Anyway, I don't want to. Do you understand now? Everard just said this in a cold voice, and there was a kind of indifference in his deep affection. The murderous aura on his body was almost completely released at this moment. After hearing Everard's words, the woman also had a faint sneer at the corner of her mouth, and her whole expression was full of indifference. Really? Are you really sure you have to fight me to the end? The woman had a condescending taste, and there was a meaning in her words that people could not refuse. I don't know why Everard at this time felt that he had a rare sense of submission in front of the woman. At this moment, Everald's expression suddenly turned ugly, and the murderous aura on him became even more obvious. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 854. That's right, don't even think about using any means to make me your slave. Let me tell you, that is absolutely impossible. At this moment, a figure was completely separated from the woman's body, and then she saw the woman collapse directly to the ground. A ball of black energy quietly formed in front of Evlid. At this time, Evlid was stunned for a moment after seeing this scene, and his eyes were fixed on the when he hit the cloud of black air, his face began to turn pale almost at that moment. Everald swallowed like this, his eyes fixed on the groups of black shadows, and his whole expression was filled with an expression of disbelief. How is it possible? You are really alive, you are really alive. At this time, Everard was even a little hysterical. His eyes were fixed on the black shadow, and his whole expression was completely filled with a kind of excitement. Incredible! After seeing this scene, the black shadow only had a faint smile on its lips, and then coughed lightly. Ahem, I'm sorry, my stupid little guy, it took me so long to see you. At this time, Everald's whole expression suddenly became complicated. At this moment, he took a deep breath, and then reluctantly calmed down his mood. You actually arrived and are really not dead now. How is this possible? This is absolutely impossible. Nothing is impossible. In fact, I should also thank your brother. If it hadn't been for your brother to peel off those memory fragments, I would not have been able to escape from the disturbed time and space. What I didn't expect was, a little guy can actually break free from the chaos of time and space. This is really hard for me to believe. A trace of ice flashed across Everald's face, and then he glanced back and forth toward the mass of black energy, and he just said in a deep voice. What exactly do you want to do? I'm very curious. Everything should have a purpose. Everyone else has a purpose, but everything you do seems to be just for destruction and destruction. Just like the prosperity of the ancient stone back then, you must destroy it. In the Middle Ages, you directed the Big Bang. What exactly do you want to do? What is your true purpose, to be precise? Everald said in a cold voice, staring at himself. The guy in front of him had a gloomy look on his face. After hearing what Everald said, the guy only had a faint sneer at the corner of his mouth, and then he said it leisurely. Actually, it's very simple. I believe you've discovered it, right? Everything I want to do is just destruction and destruction. There's nothing else. At this time, the guy was talking in a cold and unhurried voice, his expression was full of joking, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. At this time, after hearing what the guy said, Everald just thought that the guy must be crazy. His eyes were fixed on the black air in front of him. The craziest lunatic in the world is probably not 1/10,000th as good as you. At this time, after hearing what Everald said, the black aura actually evoked a faint smile at the corner of its mouth, and a hint of amusement flashed through its expression. Ha ha ha, what you said is quite true. I like the word crazy, and I prefer others to call me crazy. And at this moment, a ball of vast aura completely enveloped Everard. At this time, the mass of black energy slowly surrounded Everard and said in a cold voice. Now, can you become my slave? At this time, Everald heard the black gas. After saying this, he just felt that his consciousness began to gradually blur. At this time, he began to gradually become confused about Everald at this time. It's like a walking corpse. Of course I can, it is my honor to be your slave. At this time, Everald spoke softly. At this time, the black energy headed towards Everald's body and began to penetrate so pervasively. When the mass of black energy penetrated into Everald's body, a strange and weird laugh was heard from Everald's mouth. Gee, it's great. After 1,000 years, I finally have a body again. For such a long time, I have even forgotten what it is like to be able to experience real feelings. Everald stood up slowly, and then she saw that all the life in the surrounding space was completely drained away at that moment. At this moment, a faint breath completely burst out. At this moment, a trace of coldness suddenly flashed across the expression of the space-time beast. At this moment, his entire face seemed to be frozen, and his expression was full of disbelief. How is it possible? This is absolutely impossible, absolutely impossible. The space-time beast was even a little hysterical at that moment. The space-time beast began to struggle desperately in Lin Yu's mind. At this time, Lin Yu quickly released the space-time beast without saying a word, and then he saw a faint black gas emanating from the space-time beast. Lin Yu had understood that black gas, and he suddenly remembered that the guy seemed to have turned into that black gas when he attacked the ice goddess. When Lin Yu thought of this, he suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. He gathered his spiritual power in his palm and gently stroked the head of the space-time beast. At first, the space-time beast was still roaring desperately and rolling back and forth, as if it was in unprecedented pain. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 855. But at this time, when Lin Yu's palm touched his forehead so gently, he saw the expression of the space-time beast, which gradually began to relax. Almost at that moment, the space-time beast seemed to return to the light in an instant. At this time, after Lin Yu saw this scene, a bit of surprise flashed across his expression, and a bit of confusion flashed across his face. After a long while, the space-time beast finally came back to his senses. At this time, the space-time beast turned its head, glanced back and forth at Lin Yu, and then spoke feebly. "That guy found my brother." At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his mind couldn't help but freeze, and then his whole expression also couldn't help but tremble. "But that guy found your brother, so why did you become like this?" Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the space-time beast, his eyes full of confusion and his expression full of confusion. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space beast also had a wry smile on its lips, a trace of helplessness flashed across its expression, and a bit of bitterness between its brows. "Oh, it's hard to put it into words. This matter is really a long story." Lin Yu heard the time and space beast, and after saying this, he turned his head and glanced in his direction, with a bit of confusion in his expression, and then asked in a low voice. "It's a long story? Is there something hidden in this?" At this time, when the space-time beast heard what Lin Yu said, he couldn't help but sigh softly, and then there was a hint of helplessness in his expression. "Of course, my brother and I are actually from the same mother, and not only that, the souls between the two of us are also slightly connected in other ways. The two of us are of the same body, so we can naturally feel each other's breath, including pain or not." At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, a strange color flashed in his eyes, and then he nodded gently. He gently rubbed his chin, and then he just pondered for a moment. "If it goes according to what you said, it means that the guy now has control of your brother, and he might do the next horrible thing. In that case, I'm afraid." When the time and space beast appeared again after Lin Yu said this, he couldn't help but froze suddenly, and then squeezed out an indifferent bitter smile from the corner of his mouth. "Yes, the next thing is indeed a bit tricky, and at this moment I really don't know what to do." The space-time beast's eyes stared straight at Lin Yu, and then he sighed softly, with a look of helplessness between his brows. At this time, after Lin Yu pondered for a long time, his expression also condensed slightly, and then he gently rubbed his chin. "If we look at the situation like this, I now think that it is best for us to stop quietly and retreat to advance. First, we will see what purpose those guys have. If there is really nothing we can do by then the worst we can do is fight to the death with all our might." Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the space-time beast, and then he spoke softly. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast also nodded gently. "Yes, then just do as you say now." At this time, the space-time beast turned his head, came to Lin Yu and wrote like this, and then a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu didn't know. Why do I always feel that this time and space beast seems to be a little unusual? If there is something strange about this man, he himself can't explain it. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the space-time beast, and he glanced back and forth at the corner of his mouth, evoking a somewhat indifferent smile, which had a bit of a strange brilliance. After waiting for a while, the few of them walked outside in a leisurely manner. The journey was relatively peaceful, but Lin Yu always felt that there was a slight hint of fear in the expression of the space-time beast. A few points of difference. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Interesting, just hope I'm wrong. After a while, a few of them arrived at a secret place. At this time, Lin Yu watched intently, and then he felt a faint sword energy floating around. After Lin Yu felt this indifferent sword energy, his whole face couldn't help but feel. He looked down, and then a trace of gloom flashed across his expression. I'm afraid there will be experts around here. After hearing Lin Yu's words, the space-time beast and Bai Binjiao's expressions flashed a bit of gloom. At this time, the two of them looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy, with their eyes fixed. He nailed it on Lin Yu's body, and then said in a deep voice, "There will be experts? Could it be the people from the White Lotus sect? If that's the case, then this time it will really be a headache." At this time, Bai Binjiao just said helplessly, with a faint bitter smile on the corner of her mouth. At this time, after Lin Yu heard Bai Binjiao's words, there was a bit of playfulness in his eyes and a bit of a teasing smile at the corner of his mouth. Maybe it will be like this, maybe it won't be like this, I can't tell, and I don't know. At this time, Lin said in a calm tone. Bai Binjiao and the space-time beast, their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. A moment later, a sword energy in the distance came towards their faces from far to near. That sword energy piercing the air gave people a mysterious feeling, and the vast energy condensed into one in an instant, making people's emotions even condensed. He rose up mistily, and in the next second he saw a man holding a dark green giant sword. At this time, the man gently threw the giant sword forward. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 856. At that moment, the giant sword transformed into a saber-toothed mantis. At this time, when Bai Binjiao saw the saber-toothed mantis, his whole face couldn't help but condense. There was a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows, and his eyes were fixed on it. On that person. The three guardians of the White Lotus sect. Bai Binjiao's eyes were filled with a look of disbelief. At this time, she took a few steps back and her eyes were filled with a sense of panic. At this time, after seeing this scene, the three guardians of the White Lotus sect also had an indifferent sneer on their lips, and then in the next second, they suddenly took a step forward, an awe-inspiring aura suddenly emerged. Who am I? She is such a little beauty. If you just stand aside obediently and don't resist today, I might be able to spare your life if I am in a good mood today. At this time, the eyes of the third guardian of the White Lotus sect were fixed on Bai Binjiao, and a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, with a hint of amusement in his eyes. The look he looked at Bai Binjiao was full of aggression. At this time, Bai Binjiao saw the three guardians of the White Lotus section. After saying this, his whole face instantly became gloomy. He suddenly took a step forward, and then put himself. The thick murderous aura all over his body was completely released almost at this moment. Spare my life? This is so ridiculous. You don't want to think about it? Even though you are the third guardian of the White Lotus sect, what can you do? After the third guardian of the White Lotus sect saw this scene, a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, he turned his head and glanced at the saber-toothed mantis beside him. And then he said it leisurely and leisurely. Saber-toothed mantis, it seems like they are very doubtful about your strength now. In that case, how about you show your strength to a little bit and let them see how powerful you are. At this time, the third protector of the White Lotus sect was talking leisurely and leisurely, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. At this time, after hearing what the three guardians of the White Lotus sect said, the saber-toothed mantis suddenly flew forward without saying a word. Then they saw that the saber-toothed mantis suddenly moved towards them. coming at a gallop. The speed of this saber-toothed mantis was extremely fast, but in just a breath, it had already arrived in front of a few of them, and then they saw the saber-toothed mantis waving its forearm. The forearm of the saber-toothed mantis was extremely sharp, and he directed the sword energy one after another. The sword energy rose across the sky, making everyone's hearts tremble at this moment. A faint sword energy quietly took shape, and that sword energy soared into the sky, making everyone's hearts tremble suddenly and violently almost at this moment. That sword energy drove everyone back crazily at that moment. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he turned his head, glanced back and forth towards the space-time beast, and then said in a cold voice, "Leave this guy to you, I think you should be able to deal with him." At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were fixed directly on the space-time beast, and his expression was filled with a kind of indifference. At this time, the space-time beast's expression condensed after hearing what Lin Yu said, and then a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he spoke leisurely. "Although this guy may seem a little tricky, if you want to kill him, it's not difficult. Just leave it to me." After the space-time beast finished speaking, it suddenly flew up. But with just one breath, you could feel a strong sense of oppression. From that space, it started quietly. The space gathered together in one place. A space was directly torn apart. Where the sword pond mantis was, the space instantly turned into a black hole. A strong sense of oppression made everyone feel a little surprised at this moment. At this time, when the space-time beast saw the destroyed space, a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he shook his head in the same way. "I originally thought that this guy might still have some abilities, but now it seems like nothing more than that, and it's not worth mentioning at all." At this time, the space-time beast said coldly. But at this moment, the aura of Deoxuan nearby condensed into one place in an instant, and the ethereal aura forced everyone's minds to tremble slightly. The space-time beast suddenly stepped forward, and then a trace of strong killing intent was revealed on its body. A ray of sword energy suddenly stabbed towards the back of the space-time beast. The sword energy directly pushed the space-time beast back for a long time before it was barely able to stabilize itself. The figure, after standing still at this time, his expression became sinking and his face became cold. "Interesting, I didn't expect you to be quite capable, but even so, what can you do now? If I want to kill you, it's still easy." After Kong Shao finished speaking, he immediately saw him controlling a space and condensing a barrier from all directions. At first, the three guardians of the White Lotus sect didn't take this time and Space Beast and Lin Yu seriously, but when he saw the situation later, the three guardians of the White Lotus sect's entire face almost became ugly at this moment, his face sank, and his expression condensed. How is it possible? With such a large range of time and space blockade, I'm afraid even His Majesty the Throne may not be able to reach this level. Who are you? The three guardians of the White Lotus sect began to look a little ugly. At this time, after Lin Yu saw this scene, his eyes couldn't help but flash a little puzzled, and then he stared at the three guardians of the White Lotus sect. "Interesting, you won't tell me that you still don't know who I am." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 857. The third guardian of the White Lotus sect had a hint of gloominess in his expression, and a faint murderous aura, but it was just in that place that it completely condensed out. After seeing this scene, the third guardian of the White Lotus sect also had a slight sneer on his lips, and then he slowly took a few steps towards Lin Yu step by step. "I seem to know who you are. The leader has issued a wanted order for you. Now you have only one way to die. If you just surrender, maybe the leader will be able to let you live if he is in a good mood." After Lin Yu heard what the third protector of the White Lotus sect said, his face condensed at first, and then the corner of his mouth couldn't help but evoke an indifferent sneer. "It's interesting, but it's really interesting. Let me live." I'm just afraid that you don't deserve it. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he flew forward again, and then he saw a sword in his hand. He turned his head and glanced at the time and space beast, and then just sneered. In a moment, you can get rid of the guy blocked there, and just leave this guy to me. At this time, Lin Yu was speaking calmly and coldly, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and a rather gloomy look in his eyes. The space-time beast's expression darkened after hearing what Lin Yu said, and then he nodded lightly. Good. At this time, the space-time beast began to continuously compress the space. At this time, he saw the saber-toothed mantis making a strange hissing scream under the strong pressure of compressing the space. It looked like he was suffering unprecedented pain. Just like that, he began to struggle desperately, flying up and down and moving left and right. At this time, Lin Yu was flying forward towards the three guardians of the White Lotus sect with his sword. At this time, he was attacking each other with sword after sword, and the swords were interlocked, forcing the White Lotus sects. The three guardians were unable to resist at this moment. The third guardian of the White Lotus sect suddenly flew towards him, retreated several steps in succession, and then managed to stand firm. At this time, his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and his body was completely numb. There was a leisurely murderous aura in the room. Damn it, since you want to seek death, it would be really unjustifiable if I don't help you today. The third protector of the White Lotus sect also bit the tip of his tongue, and then he saw a dark green breath, which completely enveloped his whole body. The eyes of the third protector of the White Lotus sect were dead. He stared hard at Lin Yu, and the faint murderous intent in his body became more obvious almost at that moment. Around here, a lingering aura arises spontaneously. The third protector of the White Lotus sect, using the blood energy all over his body, made everyone's minds start to tremble crazily almost at that moment. After waiting for a while, the masses of blood energy around here exploded. The waves of blood energy forced everyone's minds to tremble suddenly at this moment. Bai Binjio, who was behind the two of them, couldn't help but tremble after seeing this scene. Bai Binjio took a few steps back with a look of panic on her face. But it was only for a moment, and then he saw that the saber-toothed mantis was crushed to pieces by a strong pressure. At this time, Lin Yu was slowly approaching the third protector of the White Lotus sect, and a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were full of gloom, and the murderous aura quietly appeared on his body. Emerged. How? Do you have anything else to say? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the third protector of the White Lotus sect, a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and a murderous aura quietly took shape in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. After seeing this scene, the third guardian of the White Lotus sect's face suddenly turned ugly. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and there was a faint murderous aura in his body. It just exploded completely. You actually dared to kill my saber-toothed mantis. If that's the case, then don't blame me for attacking you. After the third guardian of the White Lotus sect finished speaking, he suddenly flew forward, and then he saw a stream of mysterious energy rising into the sky instantly. For a moment, the mysterious energy condensed, and that moment the ethereal energy exploded completely at that moment. The third protector of the White Lotus sect suddenly flew forward, and then they saw him grabbing Lin Yu directly. The three guardians of the White Lotus sect are completely desperate. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face began to look slightly ugly. At this time, he exuded a surging murderous aura. You're just looking for death. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly flew forward and took a step forward. Then he raised the sword in his hand and slashed forward suddenly. The sword energy went straight up. After Juxiao made everyone feel the sword energy, they couldn't help but feel a bit of fear. At this time, after feeling the murderous aura from Lin Yu, the three guardians of the White Lotus sect retreated several steps madly. A faint cold smile appeared on the corner of Lin Yu's mouth. He looked down at the three guardians of the White Lotus sect with his eyes fixed on them, and a trace of contempt flashed in his eyes. How is it? Are you satisfied with me? The three guardians of the White Lotus sect opened their eyes wide with anger, and then suddenly flew forward, and then jumped towards Lin Yu. His speed was extremely fast, and every move was aimed at Lin Yu's vital points. At this time, Lin Yu retreated several steps backwards. At this time, he was walking leisurely, and he changed so much, and launched one fatal attack after another. Perhaps he was a little tired of playing, and after Lin Yu stood firm, he just shook his head. I have to admit, you got ahead of me this time. I'm really unlucky. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 858. When the third guardian of the White Lotus sect heard what Lin Yu said, he let out an angry roar, and then his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. Damn it, stop talking so shamelessly here. I swear, if I don't cut you into pieces today, I will not be a human being. After the third guardian of the White Lotus sect finished speaking, he flew into the sky again, and then he continued to attack Lin Yu's face. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he stepped back and hid a few steps behind. At this time, he also felt a little angry. Then he saw the rain next to him and waved his hand. The long sword suddenly pierced the belly of the third guardian of the White Lotus sect. The long sword cut through the air and directly pierced the abdomen of the third guardian of the White Lotus section. After seeing this scene, the third guardian of the White Lotus sect was stunned for a while. His eyes were wide open, and his whole body was stunned. Almost at that moment, his face turned completely ugly. Lin Yu couldn't help but shook his head slightly, and then a hint of sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't help but shake his head, and then a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Now, do you have anything else to say? The eyes of the third guardian of the White Lotus sect were fixed on Lin Yu, and then he spoke like this with gritted teeth. You must die a good death. Lord Throne will never let you go. At this time, Lin Yu was also in that person's ear, speaking leisurely and unhurriedly. There is no need for you, Your Majesty the Throne, to let me go. Whether I can let you, Your Majesty the Throne, go is not yet certain. An indifferent sneer appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and then he shook his head. His eyes were fixed on the third guardian of the White Lotus sect, and then there was a flash of light in his expression. A trace of contempt passed. At this time, Lin Yu pulled out the sword that had been thrust into the belly of the third protector of the White Lotus sect. At this time, the three guardians of the White Lotus sect suddenly collapsed on the ground. In a daze, a surge of energy was suddenly released from the body of the three guardians of the White Lotus sect. At this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but feel cold after feeling this aura. A hint of gloom flashed across Lin Yu's face. Damn it, that guy has now exposed our position. Now the Vikings just want to escape here quickly. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the White Lotus throne will come over soon. When Lin Yu finished speaking, a layer of dense cold sweat broke out on Bai Binjiao's forehead, and then she quickly ran to Lin Yu's side. She turned her head, her eyes fixed on Lin Yu's face turned slightly pale. After Lin Yu saw Bai Binjiao like this, there was some confusion in his eyes. At this time, he turned his head and glanced towards Bai Binjiao. Said so softly. What's wrong? Why do you look so uneasy? Bai Binjiao also had a wry smile on her lips. If we go back to the painting of Atlantis now, given that guy's character, we will probably go straight to Atlantis. By then, I'm afraid. After Bai Binjiao said this, she paused. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Bai Binjiao said, he nodded lightly, and then he turned his head, glanced towards Bai Binjiao, and then just said it softly. What are your thoughts now? In my opinion, we should not go to Atlantis for the time being. Before Lin Yu could speak, he heard the space-time beast say this. Now my brother has been possessed by that guy, which means that even if we don't go to Atlantis, that guy will definitely not let Atlantis go. The space-time beast's eyes stared straight at Bai Binjiao, and then he said in a deep voice. At this time, Benjayo opened his mouth after hearing what the space-time beast said, as if he wanted to say something. His face turned slightly pale, and then he just said this. Are you telling the truth? At this time, after hearing what Benjayo said, the space-time beast also had a faint bitter smile on its lips, and then said in a deep voice as if it had made up a great determination. Actually, to be honest, I have always been able to feel my brother's existence, and he can also feel me. That guy never likes trouble, so this time he chose to go directly to Atlantis to wait for us. There was a sense of helplessness in the eyes of the space-time beast. At this time, after Benjayo heard what the space-time beast said completely, her face turned a little pale. Benjayo's eyes stared straight at the space-time beast, and then she trembled like this. He said tremblingly. If that guy controls your brother, do you think Atlantis will be their opponent? After hearing Benjayo's question, the space-time beast just pondered for a moment, then gritted his teeth and a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. To be honest, I can't hold on. Because my brother's strength is not weak, not to mention that now that person can defeat my brother, it is enough to prove that he is much stronger than my brother. After the space-time beast said this, Benjayo's pretty face was full of disbelief, and then she said tremblingly. You must be joking with me, right? I bet you must be joking with me now. What you said must not be true, what you said must not be true. At this time, Benjayo was even a little incoherent, but the space-time beast just sighed softly. Alas, I also hope that what I said is not true, but judging from the current situation, what I said is true. The space-time beast just said helplessly. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chong. Chapter 859. At this time, after seeing this scene, Lin Yu just took a deep breath, and then turned his head and looked at the space-time beast and Benjayo. A faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then he sighed softly. Alas, according to the current situation, now, we can only rush to Atlantis. Let's hurry over now, and maybe we can rescue it a little bit. Otherwise, maybe everything will be too late. At this time, Lin Yu just said helplessly in a deep voice. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, Benjayo rushed towards the direction of Atlantis. His speed was very fast, as if he was afraid of what Lin Yu said. At this time, Lin Yu followed closely. After seeing this scene, the space-time beast also had a faint bitter smile on his lips. He just shook his head and then said leisurely. You two better not lose your composure. After seeing the space-time beast, Lin Yu suddenly flew up, and then immediately hugged Benjayo in his arms, and then whispered to Benjayo. In fact, we still have a trump card now, so there is really no need to be so anxious for the time being. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Benjayo stared at Lin Yu, and then tears flashed in her eyes, and her eyes were nailed to Lin Yu, and then she asked in a low voice. Trumpet? What trump card? Lin Yu glanced at the space-time beast, and then stared at Benjayo with a smile on his face. Don't forget, the space-time beast is our biggest trump card. He can take us through time and space. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Benjayo suddenly realized it, and then burst into laughter. At this time, Benjayo stared at Lin Yu with a smile, and then nodded gently. Yes, the space-time beast can take us directly, and we don't need to be so troublesome. At this time, Lin Yu nodded gently, and then gently rubbed Benjayo's little head, with a bit of teasing in his eyes. You silly girl, you are really stupid. At this time, Benjayo burst into laughter. Then I saw that the space-time beast used its ability to travel through time and space to instantly open up the surrounding space. Space-time is my eyes, staring straight at Lin Yu, and then said so deeply. Hurry up and go in, I can't hold on for long. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he nodded heavily, and then took Bai Binjiu and suddenly took a step forward, and then flew forward slowly. In just a breath, Lin Yu, Bai Binjiu, and the space-time beast disappeared from the spot. After they disappeared from the spot, they arrived at the Atlantis Academy in just a moment. When they arrived at Atlantis, they felt a surge of murderous aura all over their bodies. Almost in that breath, everyone's soul couldn't help but condense. In the Atlantis Academy, when they arrived, they saw a tragic scene of corpses everywhere. After seeing this scene, Bai Binjiu's eyes flashed with a bit of disbelief, and then the pupils suddenly enlarged, and her expression was full of confusion. How is it possible? How could it be like this? Who did it? Who did it? At this time, Bai Binjiu was almost yelling hysterically, and his face turned pale instantly, and then his hair turned pale and mottled at a speed visible to the naked eye. After seeing Bai Binjiu like this, Lin Yu felt as if his heart was stabbed by something. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on Bai Binjiu, and then he said softly, "My condolences, don't worry, no matter what, I will make him pay the price this time." A strong breath from Bai Binjiu's body quietly cleared up, and then, even though there was a distance between them, Lin Yu could still feel a sense of coldness. After Lin Yu felt this sense of coldness at this time, his face turned pale almost at that moment. "Why is it you again?" Lin Yu said coldly, with a trace of indifference in his expression. Then, Bai Binjiu was seen walking towards Lin Yu with a smile on her face, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. "Why can't it be me?" Lin Yu's forehead had 3 black lines, and then he said in a cold voice, "You shouldn't be here, because if you are here, it means her life is in danger." At this time, Lin Yu just said this in a cold voice, with a hint of gloominess flashing through his expression, and a strong murderous aura. Almost at that moment, everyone's minds began to feel slightly agitated. Trembling. At this time, Bai Binjiu also looked completely coquettish. Her eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then she said softly, "I'm so scared. But if you hurt me now, you are hurting this little girl. Are you sure you really want to do something to me?" Bai Binjiu's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, with a hint of playfulness flashing through her deep affection. At this time, Lin Yu's expression became cold after seeing this scene, and then he suddenly took a step forward. His eyes were fixed on Bai Binjiu, and then he said this almost as if he was gritting his teeth. "I think you are in a difficult situation right now, maybe you are playing with fire. But let me tell you, if you really dare to hurt her, I will definitely make you regret it." Lin Yu's eyes widened with anger, and the murderous aura in his body was even more stern. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 860. At this time, after seeing this scene, Bai Binjiu also had a faint smile on her lips, and there was quite a bit of amusement between her eyebrows. "You want to kill me? Then I'm really scared. I'm really curious as to why you want to not let me go. Don't forget that there are people eyeing you now." At this time, Bai Binjiu was staring at Lin Yu with a smile on her face. After seeing this scene, the space-time beast's face flashed with a rare sense of solemnity, and then he turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. "Don't get along with this guy. I'm afraid it won't be long before my brother comes. Let's find a way to deal with my brother first. That guy is very difficult to deal with." At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his whole face flashed with ice. Then he took a deep breath, and then forcibly suppressed himself. There was a faint killing aura in his body. "It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter." At this time, a faint breath began to quietly wrap around their bodies. The faint breath made Lin Yu's expression look more solemn. Lin Yu half squinted. His eyes and body showed a bit of murderous intent. Damn it, how could it be like this? At this time, Lin Yu's expression darkened, and a vast aura began to quietly release from his chest. Waiting for the next second, a leisurely atmosphere began to spread bit by bit around the area. Then he saw a figure slowly revealing his figure in the void. The figure was staring at Lin Yu with a smile on his face. The whole person was condescending, like a king overlooking the world, generally giving people a feeling. An unprecedented sense of oppression. When Lin Yu felt the aura of that person, a bit of coldness flashed across his face. Damn it, I didn't expect you to dare to show up now. I think you are really impatient now. The vast murderous aura in Lin Yu's body was completely released almost at that moment, and the ethereal murderous aura intertwined and coiled in the air. Then, a faint breath suddenly erupted almost at that moment. Then he saw Everald, standing in the void with an indifferent expression, as if he was the king looking down on the world. After seeing this scene, the expression on the space-time beast's face froze for an instant. At this time, the space-time finger took a deep breath, and then a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Oh, I just never thought that things would turn out like this in the end. Brother, why do you think you are doing this? At this time, the eyes of the space-time beast were fixed on the body of Iflild, and then he said this in a long voice. Everard heard the time and space beast, and after finishing speaking, he couldn't help laughing wildly. Ha ha ha, my stupid brother. At this time, Everald's eyes were staring straight at the space-time beast, and a teasing smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, with a look of disdain on his face. At this time, after hearing what Everald said, the time and space beast's expression began to suddenly freeze, as if it had froze. He stared at Everald coldly and then said almost through gritted teeth. Everald, I don't want to say anything more to you, but right now, I just hope you can wake up. You have to know that if you don't wake up, I'm afraid you will be enslaved by that guy forever. After the time and space beast said this, they heard a wild laugh. Ha ha ha, ridiculous, ridiculous and stupid guy, now your dear brother has become my slave, there is no need, wait some time. At this time, Everald said in a cold voice, and the faint murderous aura in her body was completely released almost at this moment. A strong force exploded completely in almost an instant, and then he saw a wisp of misty air not far away, rising into the sky in an instant. In the end, the gurgling dark power around them completely condensed towards them almost at this moment. That group of dark power was able to move towards them almost at this moment. Seeing the vitality around him and the thin spiritual power in the air, he was instantly sucked away. At this time, after Lin Yu saw this scene, his whole face could not help but condense, and his expression became cold. How is that possible? What on earth is going on? Then he saw Everald condescending, and then her eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then she said softly. I originally thought that you might have some abilities, but now it seems that it is nothing more than that, not worth mentioning at all. At this time, Lin Yu clenched his fists after hearing what Everald said, almost speaking like this through gritted teeth. Damn it, stop being complacent here, you will regret it later. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Everard only had a faint sneer on his lips, and then a bit of contempt flashed in his eyes. Really? Will I regret it later? That's not necessarily true. A bloody aura emerged from Everard's body, and the violent murderous aura almost made Lin Yu retreat several steps in succession before he could barely stand firm. Lin Yu's expression was full of gloom. Damn it! At this time, Lin Yu directly released the murderous aura on his body in an instant. The vast and ethereal power in the void quietly condensed into one, and almost in the next second, the vast aura around it was seen to be completely fused together. Lin Yu struggled and resisted desperately, but to little avail.